If you're a baby boomer with a family, you're about to be part of the biggest wealth transfer in American history. And if you're not prepared, you can end up leaving money to the IRS instead of your kids. Today, I'm pleased to welcome a guest, Vince Tiseo. He heads up the business strategy team at Goldman Sachs. In this episode, we're going to highlight the common challenges that come with multi-generational wealth planning, and we're going to show you how to navigate these to create a successful outcome for you and your family. You're also going to learn that transferring wealth isn't just about money. It's about passing along values and traditions. I'm Brad Leinberger with Seaside Wealth Management, and this is Navigating Retirement. Let's jump into this important conversation. All right, well, Vince, welcome. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day and joining us here and sharing some of your wisdom and insight with our audience. We're so excited to have you here. As the global head of business strategy for Goldman Sachs, you've seen a lot, and so we're really looking forward to tapping into that wisdom today. The first question we have for you is, in your role at Goldman Sachs, you've seen a lot of challenges that people face when it comes to multi-generational wealth creation and transfer. Share with us some of those common challenges that people face when it comes to this issue.
Certainly. And thanks, Brad, for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here. I think that we don't spend enough time on these topics because we get busy, like you mentioned, and we're always running, kind of all over the place. But what's really interesting in our global travels, what we see is it boils down to a few key things. If you think about, you worked hard most of your career and you don't want to lose any money to government taxes. There's all kind of different types: gift taxes, estate taxes, generation skipping taxes. You want to keep what you earn. So that's the first one, is you don't want to lose money, unnecessary money, I should say, to the government. The second thing is estate taxes specifically. And I like to call those the silent killer of wealth transfer. We don't often know about them. Nowadays it's $14 million for individuals and around 28 million for couples. I just went through this process with my wife and and I'm like, okay, I'm not in those categories. And then my advisor said to me, well, how about the state of Illinois? And I was like, oof. And then when he told me the numbers, I said, oh, I've got a problem. So we don't know about these oftentimes. We don't know the exact numbers. They're always changing. And so that's another one, just estate taxes. And I think the most important one, and this is the one that I really see most people challenged with, is they lose their legacy. And this is where even the wealthiest people, Prince, singer, lost his music, and that was the big thing for him. Joe Robbie lost his stadium. They had more money than they needed to in their lifetimes and probably enough to gift to their generations, but they lost what was most important to them. And so I often think that one of the biggest challenges, not being able to live and deliver the legacy you want to your family like you want it. And that's different for everybody.
Right.
So again, losing money to government, state taxes, and again, that family legacy, it's so important to people.
So how do we begin to solve for some of these challenges?
Well, the obvious one would be do some estate and tax planning, which is easier said than done. It's a difficult thing because there's a lot of documents required, but it's very good to look at not only the federal, the state, but just what a kind of tax planning, and everybody's in a different place there. Get smart. Financial literacy is really, really important. That's why, Brad, I love that you do these, because oftentimes it's just learning what I know or I don't know. And I think oftentimes we don't spend enough time doing that. Younger generations are pretty good at this, and they're very much interested in financial literacy. So educate yourself. And if you're not quite sure, reach out to your advisor. And then the last one is legacy planning. This is super, super important. Sit down with, your spouse. Talk about your family values, the plans, your expectations. Once you do that, then speak to your advisor and talk about how you want to implement that. It's amazing how people that are in this business, myself included, they ask the question to my wife, what does the legacy look like for your family? They ask me the same question. We've been married 30 years and our answers aren't the same, and they should be. So having this conversation around what it means, but what it did for us, which was great, was it got us talking about it. And now we're lining up what's important. So do that legacy planning in addition to the literacy. And then obviously once you've done that, I did those in reverse order, then go out and get the estate and the tax, all that work done with your advisor.
Well, you touch on something that's so interesting. Around here, we do what we call the family meeting, where we have the matriarch and patriarch sit down with their kids and sometimes the grandkids, if appropriate, and having the next generation hearing what's on the mind and in the heart of grandma, grandpa, or mom and dad goes such a long way in really protecting and preserving that family long after mom and dad pass. And
And Brad, I can tell you that's critical because
yeah,
transferring the money and doing all the nuts and bolts of our business is the easy part. How do you transfer values? How do you transfer work ethic? How do you
right,
transfer things that are so important to people?
right,
It's hard to do. And a lot of times it's just starting with the conversation and then having,
right,
discussions on a regular basis. That's what people really want when it comes to
yeah,
legacy. And I don't care if you've got 5 million or 500 million. Everybody has a legacy that they want to, transfer to the next gen,
right.
and not enough people sit down and talk about it.
So, in your role, what are some common roadblocks and landmines that you see when people really implement some of these solutions? What gets in their way?
Well, the biggest one is the one I see everywhere, whether it's in the US or Asia or Europe. It's just the whole discomfort talking about wealth. In most cases, people have an intention to do it, but then they don't get around to it, or their
Right,
kids maybe aren't old enough. They just feel uncomfortable. And it's maybe
right,
not just with their children. Maybe their children have gotten married and now you've got in-laws to deal with. And so they're like, well, I'm not comfortable talking about my daughter's husband around my daughter's husband.
right,
Sometimes bad family communications. Sometimes families are dysfunctional. They just don't talk really well. Oftentimes it can be just a poor financial literacy. They're not sure. I had a client I work with. He sold a business for $100 million. He never really had any kind of money. Didn't realize that he had all these quote unquote problems now because he's a pretty wealthy person now.
right.
Complexity is another one. They don't have the right investment or the right trust solutions. So complexity gets much more difficult as you get higher net worth, and they just don't understand all the moving pieces. And again, if you're a professional in any field of endeavor, you probably were really good at that, but doesn't mean that you're all of a sudden good with financial or estate planning as well.
Right.
And I think the last one, which is, I know it sounds very much common sense, but it isn't common practice, the professional guidance. If you're going to do something like you're going to go play golf, you want to go to a golf pro and he's going to help you. If you want to learn pickleball, you want to go to a person who's going to teach you that. I'm just giving some silly examples,
Right.
but I have to tell my doctor friends, well, I can do it myself. I'm like, well, would you do your own surgery? And they're like, no, of course I
Right.
wouldn't. I go to a professional. And I
Right.
say, well, then when you're dealing with something you're not dealing, talking about on a regular basis, you don't have the expertise and the financial and estate planning, you got to seek that professional advice because when you
Right.
have serious amounts of money, you need that advice because it's going to make a big, big difference, not just to save on taxes and to help you transfer the wealth, but to really make sure that legacy is implemented the way that you and your spouse or you and your
Right.
family are designing to do that.
So I love your perspective here, and now I want to get a little bit more granular for the
Sure.
audience and give them some actionable things. So if you could give me specific examples of solutions that you've seen have success in the past.
Yeah, I would say, if I were thinking of solutions, some of them are estate planning and some of them are just general discussion points with families, but definitely setting up the right trusts and the right gifting strategies. Again, another example. When our kids were young, we did our estate planning. We're like, okay, we're done with that. And now all of a sudden they're all young adults. We don't need guardianship anymore. And,
Right.
when our advisor asked how we distribute the wealth, I said, it's very simple. I've got 3 kids. Whoever takes care of mom and dad gets 100%. And then we laughed. But it's having those sort of strategies in place. And then another one I think is people don't think about too much because the trusts and the gifting that's sort of like common in our estate planning world. When you get into specific investments, this is where it gets a little bit sticky. Direct indexing. And I say direct indexing because there's a lot of flexibility with those kinds of vehicles. And depending on where you come from, meaning if you're coming with concentrated positions or if you're trying to do some kind of filtering out of certain kinds of securities because you're not comfortable with those kind of investments, this is an investment solution that's becoming very, very prevalent now with very wealthy families, and it's not utilized enough. And I think primarily because of awareness.
Well, and I wouldn't say it's just for the wealthy either. I'd say specifically it's for taxable brokerage accounts, so those non-retirement accounts.
Exactly.
And we people are able to track the performance of indices, and we wouldn't recommend one. You can have multiple, globally diversified. but then you get some tax alpha, some tax advantage for doing this. So, those are the things I like about it. What do you love about direct indexing?
Yeah, and I love how you said, it's not just for the wealthy, and wealth is how you define it, and it's usually in non-quantitative terms. But you're right, this isn't just for the $100 million client or the $10 million
Oh,
client. It's for the $1 million client,
sure.
or even lower. So it's very great tool because to your point, you can optimize taxes. That's one of them. You have much more control over the tax situation. You can build a custom portfolio. And for some people, if I come to you with a lot of Goldman Sachs stock, for example, because I work for Goldman Sachs, I got a concentrated position. I need to work around that. I don't need more Goldman Sachs, for example. Maybe you want to filter out certain stocks. Maybe you have a certain kind of a bent towards or a bent away from certain companies. You have a choice, a little bit more control over that. A lot of flexibility and control, often lower fees. And I think just in general, they're really good vehicle for estate planning and gifting. When you think about gifting a security, you oftentimes might have a high basis where you got to pay taxes on. You want to mitigate that. And oftentimes when you put it into an estate, you can either eliminate that tax and or you can get step up basis, which is a little bit more complicated topic, but essentially you're giving more money to your heirs down the road than less money. So again, with the direct indexing investment, you have a lot of control over doing all those different strategies, both from the investing, the estate, and I think just from how people want to invest in things they understand and know, you got a
Right.
lot more control over that as well.
Yeah. And I'm with you. I think that the tax benefit, the tax alpha that comes with this is very powerful. Lower that tax bill. So, okay, so what would be the next step for our audience? What's an actionable item? What should they do now?
Well, I would say, kind of reviewing some of the things we talked about. First of all, have the legacy conversation with your family. At least start with, the husband, wife, or the spouses, however that works. And if you can bring in children as well, if they're old enough, that's a first and foremost. The second is you definitely need to consult a professional. A professional is going to be there to help quarterback a lot of this. Oftentimes in the business that I work in, it's the financial advisor because the financial advisor works with the lender and the estate planner and the tax specialist and everybody else. He or she can be very, very good conduit to help coordinate all those efforts because again, they do this day to day. And I think the last one is just commit yourself to education and review. So, like I gave you my example earlier, it's not a one and done exercise. What happens today is great, but then when my kids turn a certain age, we're going to have the conversation. When they turn another age and they get married, it's going to be another conversation. Again, we've got a very good advisor that's kind of helping us along the way because, like you said at the beginning of this call, Brad, we're busy, you're busy, we're all busy. So we need somebody to help us, like a personal trainer, make
Yeah.
sure we get these things done and we
Yeah.
stay on top of it. So that's where
Yeah.
I would start with those three things.
Fantastic. Well, Vince, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate those action items and for your insight and wisdom. And thanks for joining us today.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for the time, Brad. Appreciate it.
Hopefully, you picked up some nuggets of wisdom in my conversation with Vince. Folks, this is a guy who's seen it all and done it all, and he's at one of the top financial firms in the country. And if he's telling you the importance of working with an advisor, you should listen to him. So if anything he said raised some questions in your mind, reach out to us. We're here to have a conversation with you about transferring wealth to your family. You can find us at team@seasidewealth.com or visit our website, seasidewealth.com. And if you're on YouTube, like and subscribe. And if you're listening on Spotify, give us a follow. Otherwise, share this episode with friends as word of mouth is really helping us grow. See you on the next one.